The lightning cracked across the sky, splitting the darkness as Daisy Valois clutched her 4-year-old son closer to her chest, shielding him from the relentless Montana rain with nothing but her worn shawl and determination. The Clearwater Stage Depot in Galesburg was deserted at this late hour in 1878, leaving her alone on the muddy thoroughfare with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and dwindling hope. Her son, Timothy, whimpered against her shoulder, his small frame shivering despite her best efforts to keep him warm. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the downpour. "Papa's stage will be here soon." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Timothy's father wouldn't be coming, not now, not ever. The telegram had arrived 3 weeks prior, informing her of Michael's death in a mining accident in Colorado. With no money left and eviction looming, she had sold nearly everything to purchase stage tickets to her cousin's home in Idaho, only to discover upon arrival that the next stage westward wouldn't depart until morning. Water seeped through the thin soles of her boots as she paced the boardwalk, desperate for shelter. The depot manager had locked up hours ago, unsympathetic to her pleas for a place to wait inside. The saloon down the street glowed with lantern light, but she couldn't bring a child into such an establishment. The hotel across the way had turned her away when she couldn't produce enough coins for a room. "Mama, I'm cold," Timothy mumbled into her neck. "I know, sweetheart." "Just a little longer." Daisy fought back tears. She had promised him adventure and a new beginning, not a night spent huddled in the rain. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn, hope flaring in her chest before she tamped it down. A lone rider appeared through the curtain of rain, tall in the saddle atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his features, his duster slick with rainwater. He reined in his horse before her, regarding her with eyes she couldn't quite see in the darkness. For a moment, they simply stared at one another, a woman with a child clutched to her breast and a stranger on horseback, connected by nothing but circumstance and the pounding rain. "Madam," he finally said, his voice deep and roughened by the elements, "you'll catch your death out here." He dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching slowly as if afraid she might bolt like a spooked deer. Now that he stood before her, Daisy could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. His eyes, now visible beneath the brim of his hat, were a startling blue-green, like the mountain lakes she'd seen in paintings. "Stage ain't coming till morning," he continued when she remained silent. "You need someplace dry for the night." Daisy clutched Timothy tighter. "We're fine, thank you," she said, summoning what dignity she could while standing soaked to the skin. The man's expression softened as he looked at Timothy, the boy's shivering something fierce. As if to confirm this observation, Timothy coughed, a wet, rattling sound that tore at Daisy's heart. The stranger removed his hat, revealing thick hair the color of aged whiskey. "Name's Grant Quentin," he said. "I run the livery at the edge of town. Got a small room above it with a stove that's good and hot. It ain't much, but it's dry, and you're welcome to it for the night." "I can't pay you," Daisy admitted, her pride crumbling in the face of her son's discomfort. Grant replaced his hat and shook his head. "Wasn't asking for payment. Why would you help strangers?" His gaze moved from her face to Timothy and back again. "Because I've seen enough folks suffering to last a lifetime," he said simply. "And because no mother and child should be left standing in the rain." Another crack of lightning illuminated his features, and Daisy saw nothing but sincerity in his weathered face. Still, she hesitated. "I promise you'll be safe," Grant added, as if reading her thoughts. "Got my word on that." Timothy coughed again, this time more violently, and Daisy made her decision. "Thank you, Mr. Quentin. Grant nodded once, then turned to retrieve his horse. "Can I help with your trunk? It's all we have left," she admitted quietly. Without another word, he hoisted the trunk onto his shoulder with surprising ease, then offered his free hand to help her mount his horse. Once she was settled with Timothy still clutched to her chest, he handed her the reins. "I'll walk alongside," he explained. "It's not far." As they made their way through the muddy streets of Galesburg, Grant glanced up at her, rain streaming down his face. "You'll never wait alone in the rain again," he said, his words a promise that warmed something long cold within her. "Not while I'm around." Daisy didn't respond, but as they trudged through the storm, she wondered if perhaps the rain that had seemed so cruel was actually a blessing in disguise. The livery stable smelled of hay, leather, and horses, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar to Daisy, who had spent most of her life in mining towns where mules were more common than horses. Grant led them through the main floor, past stalls where curious equine heads poked out to observe the newcomers. "This way," he said, guiding them toward a narrow staircase at the back. "Mind your step." The room above the livery was small but tidy. A cast iron stove glowed red in one corner, radiating welcome heat. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt occupied another corner, while a table with 2 chairs stood beneath a small window that rattled with each gust of wind. "It ain't much," Grant said again, setting her trunk down by the door. "It's wonderful," Daisy replied honestly, relief flooding through her as she felt the warmth begin to seep into her chilled bones. Timothy had fallen into an exhausted sleep against her shoulder, his breathing still worryingly raspy. Grant crossed to a cupboard and pulled out a clean towel. "You can use this for the boy," he offered. "I've got a shirt that might do as a nightshirt for him. It'll be enormous, but it's dry." "Thank you," Daisy said, accepting both the towel and, a moment later, a faded flannel shirt that had been mended multiple times. "I'll leave you to get settled," Grant said, moving toward the door. "There's coffee in the tin by the stove and some jerky in the jar on the table if you're hungry. I'll be down with the horses if you need anything." "Where will you sleep?" Daisy asked suddenly. Grant shrugged. "Got a bedroll in the tack room. Won't be the first time I've bedded down with the horses." Guilt twisted in her stomach. "We can't take your bed, Mr. Quentin." "Grant," he corrected. "And you're not taking anything I'm not freely offering." His eyes fell on Timothy again. "The boy needs proper rest. I'll be fine." Before she could protest further, he was gone, his boots thumping down the wooden stairs. Daisy gently laid Timothy on the bed and began removing his wet clothes. His skin was too warm to the touch, confirming her fears that he was developing a fever. She dried him as best she could and dressed him in Grant's enormous shirt before tucking him under the quilt. Her own clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin. But she had nothing else to change into without opening her trunk, and she was too exhausted to face that task now. Instead, she pulled a chair close to the bed and settled in to watch over her son, listening to the rain pound against the roof and wondering what tomorrow would bring. She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, the door was opening quietly and Grant was entering with a steaming mug in his hand. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her a cup of coffee. "How's the boy?" "Feverish," Daisy admitted, accepting the mug gratefully. The rain and cold. Grant crossed to the bed and placed a calloused hand gently on Timothy's forehead. "He's burning up all right," he confirmed, frowning. "I've got some willow bark. My ma always swore by it for fevers." "I'd appreciate that," Daisy said. "I'm afraid I don't have much experience with illness. Timothy has always been so healthy." Grant nodded and disappeared back down the stairs, returning minutes later with a small pouch. "Steep this in hot water," he instructed, handing it to her. "It's bitter, but it helps." As Daisy prepared the tea, Grant stood awkwardly by the door. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll wait downstairs while you change." Daisy felt a flush creep up her neck. "I thank you." Once alone, she quickly retrieved a nightgown from her trunk and changed, hanging her wet dress and petticoats near the stove to dry. The tea she'd prepared for Timothy smelled acrid, but she woke him gently and coaxed him to drink it, promising that it would make him feel better. "I don't like it, Mama," he protested weakly. "I know, sweetheart, but it will help the burning feeling go away." After he'd consumed as much as she could convince him to take, she sang softly to him until he drifted back to sleep, then went to the door and called down the stairs to let Grant know he could return. He appeared moments later with a bundle under one arm. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, unwrapping what turned out to be a loaf of bread and a small jar of honey. "Not much of a supper, but better than jerky." "You're very kind," Daisy said, suddenly realizing how famished she was. They sat at the small table, sharing the simple meal in comfortable silence. Finally, Grant spoke. "Where are you headed?" Daisy glanced at Timothy before answering. "Idaho. My cousin has a homestead there. She wrote that I could join her after." She trailed off, unwilling to speak of her husband's death. Grant nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Long journey for just the two of you." "We don't have much choice," Daisy admitted. "After Michael died, there was nothing left for us in Silver Creek." "Colorado mining town?" Grant asked. "Yes, we were there for 6 years. Michael thought he'd strike it rich, but—" She shrugged, the gesture conveying years of disappointment and hardship. Grant's gaze was steady. "And now you're starting over." "Trying to," Daisy corrected. They fell silent again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something about Grant Quentin that put her at ease, despite the precariousness of her situation. "The stage westward leaves at noon tomorrow," Grant said eventually. "I can take you to the depot in the morning." "Thank you," Daisy said, the words seeming inadequate for all he had done. "For everything." Grant shrugged again, obviously uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest, Mrs." He paused, realizing he didn't know her name. "Valois," she supplied. "But please call me Daisy." "Daisy," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Sleep well." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "If the boy worsens in the night, call for me. I'm a light sleeper." Daisy nodded, touched by his concern. After he left, she climbed into bed beside Timothy, carefully cradling her feverish son. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for a long time as she thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them to this place, and the quiet kindness of the man downstairs. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the small window. Daisy woke to find Timothy's fever had broken during the night, much to her relief. The boy was still sleeping peacefully, his breathing easier than it had been the previous evening. She dressed quietly, smoothing down her rumpled dress as best she could. The sound of movement downstairs told her that Grant was already awake and going about his business. She wasn't sure of the protocol should she go down, or wait for him to come up. Her dilemma was solved when a soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Timothy. Grant entered, looking freshly washed, his hair still damp. He carried a tray with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of biscuits. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the table. "How's the boy?" "Better," Daisy replied with a smile. "His fever broke sometime in the night." Relief flashed across Grant's face. "Good. That's good." He seemed different in the daylight, younger somehow, despite the lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult years. His clothes, though worn, were clean and well-maintained. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that Daisy found herself admiring. "I've been thinking," Grant said, pouring coffee for them both. The stage to Idaho won't arrive for a few more hours. If you'd like, I could show you and Timothy around Galesburg. It's not much, but there's a general store that sells penny candy. The thought of Timothy's face lighting up at the sight of candy warmed Daisy's heart. He'd love that, she said, if you're sure it's not an imposition. Grant's smile transformed his face, softening the hard angles. No imposition at all. As if on cue, Timothy stirred, his eyes opening to take in the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, confusion clouded his features before he spotted Daisy. "Mama," he questioned, his voice small. "I'm here, sweetheart," Daisy assured him, crossing to the bed. "How do you feel?" Timothy considered the question with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. "My throat hurts," he decided, "and I'm hungry." Daisy laughed, relief washing through her. "Well, we can certainly do something about the hunger." She turned to include Grant in the conversation. "Timothy, this is Mr. Quentin. He was kind enough to give us a place to stay last night." Timothy regarded Grant solemnly. "Thank you, mister," he said with the careful politeness Daisy had instilled in him. Grant crossed the room and crouched down to be at eye level with the boy. "You can call me Grant," he offered. "And you're welcome, young man. I hear you had quite a fever last night." Timothy nodded importantly. "I was burning up," he confirmed, "but Mama gave me nasty tea." Grant chuckled, a warm, rich sound that Daisy found herself wanting to hear again. "That nasty tea helped make you better," he pointed out. "Sometimes the things that help us most don't taste too good." Timothy considered this wisdom thoughtfully. "Like vegetables." "Exactly like vegetables," Grant agreed, his eyes twinkling. Daisy watched the exchange with a strange tightness in her chest. Michael had never had much patience for Timothy's questions or observations. He'd been a hard man, made harder by disappointment and drink. The gentle way Grant spoke to her son was something she'd never expected to witness. "Are you hungry, Tim?" Grant asked, gesturing toward the biscuits. "They're not as good as what your mama probably makes, but they'll fill your belly." Timothy climbed out of bed, still swimming in Grant's enormous shirt, and padded over to the table. "Mama doesn't make biscuits," he informed Grant matter-of-factly. "We had a cook stove, but Papa sold it." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by the sound of Timothy happily munching on a biscuit. Daisy felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The story of their life in Silver Creek wasn't one she was proud of, but Timothy was still too young to understand why certain truths shouldn't be shared with strangers. Grant cleared his throat. "Well, after breakfast, how would you two like to see Galesburg?" "It's a small town, but there's a candy store and a blacksmith who's making a rocking horse that you might like to see." Timothy's eyes widened with excitement. "A real rocking horse. Can we, Mama, please?" Daisy couldn't refuse in the face of such enthusiasm. "Of course we can," she agreed. "But first, you need to get dressed." While Timothy changed back into his now dry clothes, Grant excused himself to tend to the horses. Daisy used the opportunity to quickly freshen up and repin her hair, which had come loose during the night. She wasn't entirely sure why she cared about her appearance. They would be leaving on the noon stage. After all, but she found herself wanting to look presentable for their tour of Galesburg. For Timothy's sake, she told herself firmly. It had nothing to do with the way Grant's eyes crinkled when he smiled. Galesburg turned out to be a pleasant town, despite Daisy's initial impressions formed during the previous night's downpour. The main street boasted a handful of sturdy buildings: the general store, a small hotel, the saloon she'd noticed the night before, a barber shop, and a dressmaker's shop with colorful fabrics displayed in the window. The boardwalks were still damp from the rain, but the morning sun was quickly drying the puddles. Timothy skipped between them, his illness apparently forgotten in the excitement of exploring a new place. Grant pointed out various landmarks, sharing anecdotes about the town and its inhabitants that had Daisy laughing despite herself. "And that's Mrs. Haverford's house," he said, indicating a neat white building with green shutters. "She makes the best apple pies in Montana territory, but you have to listen to at least 30 minutes of gossip before she'll share a slice." "Is it worth it?" Daisy asked, amused. Grant pretended to consider the question seriously. "Depends on how hungry you are," he decided. "And how much you like hearing about who wore what to church last Sunday." They continued down the street, Timothy running ahead to inspect anything that caught his interest. When they reached the blacksmith's forge, Grant called out a greeting to the burly man working at the anvil. "Morning, Hank. Thought I'd show young Timothy here that rocking horse you've been working on." The blacksmith set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his apron. "Well now, it's not quite finished," he said, looking down at Timothy with a friendly smile. "But I reckon you can have a look if you promise not to touch the tools." Timothy nodded solemnly, his eyes wide with excitement. While Hank showed Timothy the partially completed rocking horse, Grant and Daisy stood a few paces away, watching. "He's a good boy," Grant observed quietly. "Yes, he is," Daisy agreed, pride evident in her voice. "He's been through so much, but he rarely complains." Grant's eyes were thoughtful as he watched Timothy listening raptly to Hank's explanation of how the rocker mechanism worked. "Children are resilient," he said. "More than we give them credit for sometimes." Something in his tone made Daisy glance at him curiously. "You sound like you speak from experience." A shadow passed over Grant's face. "My sister had a boy about Timothy's age," he said after a moment. "Lost them both to influenza 2 winters back." "I'm sorry," Daisy said, meaning it. "Were you close?" Grant nodded, his gaze still on Timothy. "She was my only family," he said simply. "Lillian and her boy Thomas." Daisy's heart ached for him. She knew what it was to lose family. Her parents had died within months of each other when she was 19, leaving her alone in the world until she'd met Michael. "Is that why you helped us?" she asked softly. "Because of Thomas?" Grant considered her question, then shook his head. "Maybe partly," he admitted. "But mostly because it was the right thing to do. You needed help, and I was in a position to give it." Their eyes met, and for a moment Daisy felt as though they understood each other perfectly. Then Timothy came running back, bursting with excitement about the rocking horse, and the moment passed. The general store was their next stop, where Grant made good on his promise of penny candy. Timothy's face lit up with pure joy as he carefully selected 3 pieces of striped candy from the jar the shopkeeper held out. "Remember to say thank you to Mr. Quentin," Daisy reminded him. "Thank you, Grant," Timothy said, already unwrapping his treasure. "You're very welcome," Grant replied, his expression softening as he watched the boy's delight. While Timothy enjoyed his candy, Grant led them to the counter where a friendly woman was arranging spools of thread. "Morning, Martha," Grant greeted her. "This is Mrs. Valois and her son, Timothy. They're passing through on the noon stage." "Pleased to meet you," Martha said warmly. "We don't get many travelers stopping in Galesburg. Most folks just pass on through to Helena or Billings." "It seems like a lovely town," Daisy replied politely. Martha beamed at the compliment. "Oh, it is. We're small, but we look after our own. Speaking of which, Grant, did you tell Mrs. Valois about the teaching position?" Grant looked suddenly uncomfortable. "No, I didn't think teaching position." Daisy interrupted, her interest piqued. Martha nodded enthusiastically. "Our school teacher, Miss Perkins, is getting married next month and moving to Oregon with her new husband. The town council's been trying to find a replacement, but qualified teachers aren't exactly plentiful in these parts." Daisy felt a flutter of excitement. Before her marriage, she had worked briefly as a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania. It had been a position she'd enjoyed immensely but had given up when she wed Michael and moved west. "I used to teach," she admitted. "In Pennsylvania before I was married." Martha's eyes lit up. "Did you hear that, Grant? Mrs. Valois is a teacher." Grant was watching Daisy with an unreadable expression. "I heard," he said quietly. "The position comes with a small house behind the schoolhouse," Martha continued eagerly. "It's not much, but it's clean and solid. The salary isn't grand, but it's steady, and the parents often pay in goods: eggs, milk, fresh vegetables." Daisy felt dizzy with the sudden possibility opening before her. A house of their own, steady work doing something she loved, a chance to put down roots in a town that already seemed welcoming. "I were headed to Idaho," she stammered. "My cousin is expecting us." Martha's face fell. "Oh, I see. Well, it was just a thought." Grant cleared his throat. "The stage doesn't leave for another hour," he said. "Maybe you'd like to see the schoolhouse at least." Daisy hesitated, torn between practical considerations and the unexpected opportunity. "Timothy," she called. "Come here, sweetheart." Timothy came running, sticky traces of candy around his mouth. "Yes, Mama." Daisy crouched down to his level. "How would you feel about staying in Galesburg for a while, instead of going to Idaho?" Timothy considered the question. "Would we have our own house? And could I have a rocking horse like the one Mr. Hank is making?" Daisy laughed, relief flooding through her at his simple acceptance. "Maybe someday," she promised. "But yes, we would have our own house." Timothy nodded decisively. "Then I want to stay. I like it here. And I like Grant." Daisy glanced up to find Grant watching them, an expression on his face she couldn't quite decipher. "Well," she said, straightening, "I suppose we should see that schoolhouse." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple white building with a bell tower and a small, separate structure behind it that Daisy assumed must be the teacher's residence. As they approached, she felt a growing sense of rightness, as if some invisible hand was guiding her path. "It's not grand," Grant said, leading them up the steps to the schoolhouse door. "But the town pitched in last summer to replace the roof and add new windows." He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, stepping back to allow Daisy to enter first. The interior was plain but well-maintained, with 3 rows of desks facing a larger desk at the front of the room. A blackboard covered most of one wall and bookshelves lined another. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. "How many students?" Daisy asked, already envisioning herself standing at the front of the room. "About 20, give or take," Grant answered. "Ages 6 to 14, though we've had a couple of older boys who came in winter when there wasn't farm work to be done." Timothy was already exploring, peering curiously into desks and examining the books on the shelves. "Would I go to school here, Mama?" he asked. "Not for another year or 2, Daisy replied. "But yes, eventually." Grant was watching her carefully. "Would you like to see the house?" Daisy nodded, suddenly nervous. If the house was as pleasant as the schoolhouse, she wasn't sure she'd be able to resist the temptation to stay. The teacher's residence was indeed small, just 2 rooms plus a lean-to kitchen, but it was clean and soundly built. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner of the main room, and a bed frame stood in the smaller bedroom. There was no furniture beyond that, but Daisy could easily imagine how it might look with a table, chairs, and a bed for Timothy. "The last teacher was single," Grant explained. "But I reckon you could fit a small bed for Timothy in here without too much trouble." Daisy ran her hand along the windowsill, noting the care that had been taken in the construction. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Grant seemed pleased by her assessment. "The town council would need to interview you formally, of course, but Martha's the head of the council, and she seemed mighty taken with the idea already." "And the salary," Daisy asked practically. $20 a month, Grant replied. Plus the house, of course. And like Martha said, most families contribute in other ways: food, firewood, that sort of thing. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than Daisy had now, which amounted to exactly $3.47, just enough for their stage fare to Idaho and perhaps one meal along the way. When would they need an answer? Grant scratched his chin thoughtfully. School term starts in 3 weeks. I reckon they'd want to know within a day or two. Daisy closed her eyes briefly, weighing her options. Her cousin in Idaho was expecting them, true, but they'd never been close, and the invitation had been extended more out of duty than affection. Here in Galesburg, she was being offered a chance at independence, at building a life on her own terms. "May I have a little time to think about it?" she asked finally. Grant nodded. "Of course. No need to decide this minute." He checked his pocket watch. "We should head back soon, though, if you still want to catch that stage." Daisy looked around the small house once more, then at Timothy, who was peering out the window at the schoolyard. "Yes," she said. "Let's go back." They walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Timothy ran ahead again, seemingly recovered from his illness and full of energy. As they neared the stage depot, Grant cleared his throat. "Whatever you decide," he said carefully, "I want you to know you'd be welcome here, both of you." Daisy felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. "Thank you," she replied softly. "That means a great deal." The stage was already waiting when they reached the depot, the driver securing luggage on top while 4 fresh horses stamped impatiently in their traces. A handful of passengers milled about a well-dressed couple who appeared to be traveling together, an elderly man with a cane, and a young woman clutching a small valise. "Last call for the westbound stage," the driver shouted. "Departing for Idaho territory in 10 minutes. Daisy felt frozen in place, unable to decide. Stay in Galesburg and accept the teaching position, or continue with her original plan and journey to Idaho. Grant stood quietly beside her, offering neither encouragement nor discouragement, simply a steady presence while she wrestled with her decision. "Mama," Timothy said, tugging at her skirt. "I don't want to get on the stage. Can't we stay here with Grant?" Daisy looked down at her son, then up at Grant, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the hope that flickered briefly in his eyes. In that moment, her decision crystallized. Perhaps it was foolish to alter their plans based on a day's acquaintance with a town and its inhabitants, but Daisy had learned to trust her instincts, and every fiber of her being was telling her that Galesburg was where they belonged. "Mr. Driver," she called. "I believe I'd like a refund on our tickets, if that's possible. We've decided to stay in Galesburg." The driver looked annoyed at the last-minute change, but Grant stepped forward. "I'll handle this," he said quietly to Daisy, before approaching the driver and engaging in a brief, low-voiced conversation that ended with an exchange of money. When he returned to Daisy's side, he handed her several coins. "He took $1 as a fee, but you've got the rest back." "Thank you," Daisy said, tucking the money into her reticule. "I should speak with Martha about the teaching position right away." Grant nodded. "We can do that now if you'd like, and you're welcome to stay above the livery until the teacher's house is ready for you." "You've done so much already," Daisy protested. "We can't impose further." "It's no imposition," Grant assured her. "Besides, it'll take a few days to get the house properly set up for you and Timothy." As they watched the stage depart in a cloud of dust, Daisy felt a mixture of trepidation and excitement. Had she made the right decision? Only time would tell, but standing there with Timothy happily chattering at her side and Grant's solid presence beside her, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Martha had been delighted by Daisy's decision to stay, and had immediately called an emergency meeting of the town council to interview her for the teaching position. The interview had been more of a formality than a rigorous assessment, with the council members more interested in hearing about her background and teaching philosophy than in testing her knowledge. By the end of the meeting, Daisy had been officially hired as Galesburg's new schoolteacher, with classes to begin in 3 weeks' time. Meanwhile, news of her arrival had spread through the small town, and the community had rallied to help prepare the teacher's residence. Women arrived bearing curtains, quilts, and preserves for the pantry, while men appeared with furniture, a small table and chairs, a bed frame for Timothy, even a rocking chair that Mrs. Haverford declared was just gathering dust in her attic. Through it all, Grant remained a constant presence, helping to move furniture, installing shelves in the kitchen, and showing Daisy around the town and its surroundings. Timothy had taken to following him like a shadow, full of questions about horses and the workings of a livery stable. Daisy found herself increasingly drawn to Grant as well, though she tried to maintain a proper distance. He was unfailingly kind, not just to her and Timothy, but to everyone he encountered. He had a quiet competence about him that she found reassuring, and a dry sense of humor that often caught her by surprise. 5 days after their arrival in Galesburg, Daisy and Timothy moved into the teacher's residence. The small house had been transformed by the community's generosity, now furnished comfortably if simply, with curtains at the windows and a pantry stocked with basics. That evening, as Daisy tucked Timothy into his new bed, he asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Will we see Grant tomorrow, Mama?" Daisy smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I'm sure we will, sweetheart. He's been very kind to help us get settled." Timothy nodded, his expression serious. "I like him," he declared. "He's not like Papa, he doesn't shout, and he answers my questions." A lump formed in Daisy's throat at the simple comparison. "No, he's not like Papa," she agreed softly. "Can he come for supper tomorrow?" Timothy asked hopefully. "I want to show him my new bed." Daisy hesitated. She'd been careful to maintain a certain formality with Grant, aware of how quickly gossip could spread in a small town. But a simple supper as a thank you for his help seemed innocent enough. "I'll ask him," she promised. "Now sleep tight." After Timothy had drifted off, Daisy sat in the rocking chair by the stove, considering her situation. In less than a week, her life had been completely upended, yet she felt more at peace than she had in years. Galesburg already felt like home in a way that Silver Creek never had, despite the 6 years she'd spent there. And then there was Grant. She'd been a widow for less than a month. It was far too soon to be thinking of another man. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when he smiled, or the way she found herself looking forward to his visits. "Don't be a fool, Daisy," she murmured to herself. "He's just being neighborly." Still, as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help but wonder if Grant might see her as more than just the new schoolteacher he'd rescued from the rain. The next morning, Daisy decided to visit Grant at the livery to extend her dinner invitation. Timothy was beside himself with excitement at the prospect, practically skipping the entire way. The livery stable was busy when they arrived, with Grant shoeing a dappled gray mare while the horse's owner, a rancher Daisy recognized from town, looked on. "Almost done, Mr. Fitzgerald," Grant was saying as they entered. "Just need to secure this last nail." He glanced up, his face breaking into a smile when he spotted Daisy and Timothy. "Well, good morning. Didn't expect to see you two today." "Grant!" Timothy exclaimed, rushing forward only to stop short at a warning look from his mother. "Remember what I told you about being careful around horses," Daisy reminded him. Grant finished with the shoe and patted the mare's flank. "She's all set, Mr. Fitzgerald. Should hold for a good while." As the rancher led his horse away, Grant wiped his hands on a rag and approached Daisy and Timothy. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Timothy couldn't contain himself any longer. "Mama says you can come for supper tonight if you want to. I want to show you my new bed and the picture book Mrs. Haverford gave me." Grant looked surprised, then pleased. "Well, that's mighty kind of you," he said, glancing at Daisy for confirmation. "I'd be honored to join you for supper." "We wanted to thank you," Daisy explained, feeling suddenly shy, "for everything you've done to help us." "No thanks necessary," Grant said, his eyes warm. "But I never turned down a home-cooked meal." "What time should I arrive?" 6 o'clock, Daisy suggested. "It won't be anything fancy, I'm afraid." 6 it is, Grant agreed. "And I'm sure it'll be delicious, fancy or not." They chatted for a few more minutes before Daisy reminded Timothy that they needed to visit the general store for supplies. As they were leaving, Grant called after them. "I'll bring dessert," he offered. "Mrs. Haverford gave me an apple pie yesterday, and it's too much for one person." Daisy smiled. "That would be lovely." As they walked to the general store, Timothy chattered excitedly about Grant's upcoming visit, while Daisy tried to decide what to prepare for supper. She wanted to impress him. She realized a thought that both alarmed and excited her. At precisely 6 o'clock that evening, a knock sounded at the door. Timothy ran to answer it, flinging the door open with enthusiasm. "Grant, you came." Grant stood on the doorstep, hat in one hand and a covered dish in the other. He'd changed from his work clothes into clean trousers and a blue shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. His hair was damp, as if he'd recently washed it. "I said I would, didn't I?" he replied, smiling down at Timothy. "And I never break a promise." He stepped inside, handing the covered dish to Daisy, who'd come to greet him. "Mrs. Haverford's famous apple pie," he said. "And these are for you." From behind his back, he produced a small bunch of wildflowers, their vibrant colors a cheerful contrast against his weathered hand. "They're beautiful," Daisy said, accepting them with a smile. "Thank you." She busied herself finding a jar to use as a vase while Grant allowed Timothy to give him a tour of the small house, exclaiming appropriately over the boy's new bed and the picture book he'd been so eager to show off. Supper was a simple affair: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans that one of the townsfolk had brought from their garden, but Grant ate with evident appreciation. "This is delicious, Daisy," he said, helping himself to a second serving. "I can't remember the last time I had such a good meal." "Do you not cook for yourself?" Daisy asked, curious about his daily life. Grant shrugged. "Simple things. Bacon, beans, coffee, nothing like this." "Mama makes the best fried chicken," Timothy declared loyally. "Even better than the cook at the hotel in Silver Creek." Grant smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "I believe it," he agreed. "Your mama is a woman of many talents." Daisy felt herself blushing at the compliment. "Hardly," she demurred, "but I do enjoy cooking when I have the chance. And teaching." Grant asked, "Are you looking forward to starting the school term?" "Very much," Daisy admitted. "I've always loved teaching. It feels like a calling more than a job." They talked easily throughout the meal, with Timothy contributing eagerly to the conversation. After they'd finished Mrs. Haverford's apple pie, which was indeed exceptional, Timothy reluctantly went to bed after extracting a promise from Grant to visit again soon. Left alone in the main room, Daisy and Grant fell into a comfortable silence as she poured coffee for them both. "You've settled in well," Grant observed, looking around the cozy room. "It already feels like you and Timothy belong here." "It's strange," Daisy admitted, settling into the rocking chair while Grant took a seat at the table. "I've only been in Galesburg a week, yet it feels more like home than Silver Creek ever did." Grant's expression grew thoughtful. Some places just fit, I suppose. I felt that way when I came here 3 years ago. Where were you before? Daisy asked, realizing how little she actually knew about him despite the comfort she felt in his presence. All over, Grant replied. Colorado, Wyoming, even California for a spell. After the war, I couldn't seem to stay in one place for long. The war, Daisy echoed. You fought in the war between the states, Grant nodded, his eyes distant. Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63 when I was 18. Saw too much before it was over. He shook his head slightly, as if to dispel the memories. Afterward, I drifted. Worked ranches, tried my hand at mining, drove cattle. Nothing seemed to stick until I came to Galesburg. And you bought the livery? Old man Jenkins was looking to retire, Grant explained. I had some savings and I've always had a way with horses. It seemed right. Daisy sipped her coffee, trying to reconcile this new information with the man she was coming to know. And your sister? She asked gently. The one you mentioned before. Pain flashed briefly across Grant's face. Lillian was younger than me by 4 years. Our parents died when she was 15, so I looked after her. She married a good man, had Thomas, and they were happy. Then influenza came through their settlement. He trailed off, the rest of the story hanging unspoken between them. I'm sorry, Daisy said softly. Grant nodded in acknowledgement. What about you? He asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. You mentioned Pennsylvania. Is that where you're from? Originally, yes, Daisy confirmed. My father was a school teacher too in a small town outside Pittsburgh. I followed in his footsteps and taught for 2 years before I met Michael. She paused, uncertain how much to share about her marriage. Grant seemed to sense her hesitation. You don't have to talk about him if you'd rather not, he offered. Daisy shook her head. It's all right. It's just complicated. She took a deep breath. Michael was charming when we met, full of dreams and plans. He convinced me that we could build a wonderful life out west. My parents had just died and I was lonely, so when he proposed after only a month's acquaintance, I accepted. She stared into her coffee cup, remembering. The journey west was difficult, but I was still hopeful. We settled in a mining town in Colorado, and for a while, things were good. Timothy was born and Michael seemed happy. But then the mine started producing less and Michael changed. Grant's expression was one of quiet understanding. Drink? He asked simply. Daisy nodded. And gambling. He'd disappear for days, then come home with empty pockets and a temper. After a while, he started selling things to pay his debts, my mother's silver, furniture, eventually even the cook stove, as Timothy mentioned. And now, Grant prompted when she fell silent. He died in a mining accident 3 weeks ago, Daisy said, the words easier to say than she'd expected. I mourned the man I married, but that man had been gone for a long time. Grant nodded, his eyes holding no judgment. I'm sorry for your loss, he said formally, and for what you endured before that. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle creaking of the rocking chair and the distant chorus of crickets outside. Thank you for sharing that with me, Grant said finally. I know it can't have been easy. Daisy smiled faintly. Actually, it was easier than I expected. You're easy to talk to. Their eyes met across the small room, and Daisy felt a connection forming between them, fragile but undeniable. Grant seemed to feel it too, for he set down his coffee cup and cleared his throat. It's getting late, he said, rising to his feet. I should let you get some rest. Daisy walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you for coming, she said, and for the flowers, and Mrs. Haverford's pie. Grant smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a long time since I enjoyed an evening so much. He hesitated, then reached out to briefly touch her hand. Good night, Daisy. "Good night, Grant," she replied softly. After he left, Daisy stood at the window, watching his tall figure disappear into the darkness. A strange mixture of emotions swirled within her: gratitude, confusion, and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation for the school term. Daisy spent hours organizing the schoolhouse, reviewing the available textbooks, and preparing lesson plans for students of various ages and abilities. The previous teacher, Miss Perkins, had left detailed notes about each child's progress, which proved invaluable. Grant remained a steady presence in their lives, often stopping by to see how they were settling in or bringing small gifts: a book of fairy tales for Timothy, fresh eggs from a farmer who'd paid for horseshoeing with produce, a jar of honey from someone's hives. He took Timothy riding on his gentle mare, teaching the boy the basics of horsemanship with infinite patience. Daisy found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. There was a quiet strength about Grant that she found deeply attractive, and his kindness toward Timothy only increased her growing feelings for him. The day before school was to begin, Daisy was in the schoolhouse making final preparations when she heard the door open. She turned, expecting to see one of the town's children come to investigate their new teacher, but instead found Grant standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I was passing by and thought I'd see if you needed any help." Daisy smiled, pleased by his unexpected appearance. "I'm nearly finished, but thank you. I'm just a bit nervous about tomorrow." Grant crossed to where she stood arranging books on a shelf. "You'll do fine," he assured her. "The children are good kids, mostly. A bit rowdy at times, but eager to learn." "I hope so," Daisy said. "It's been a while since I taught a full classroom." "Where's Timothy?" Grant asked, looking around as if expecting to find the boy hiding somewhere. "Mrs. Haverford offered to watch him for the afternoon," Daisy explained. "She mentioned something about teaching him to bake cookies." Grant chuckled. "He'll enjoy that. Mrs. Haverford loves having children in her kitchen." They worked together for a while, Grant helping to arrange desks and hang a map of the United States that Daisy had found rolled up in a cupboard. The easy companionship that had developed between them made the work pleasant, and Daisy found herself laughing at Grant's stories about his own school days. "So there I was," he was saying, 12 years old and caught red-handed with a frog in my pocket that I'd been planning to put in the teacher's desk." "What did the teacher do?" Daisy asked, amused by the mental image of a young Grant as a mischief maker. "Made me write 'I will not bring amphibians to school' 100 times, Grant replied, grinning at the memory. "And then had me give a presentation on the life cycle of frogs. I learned my lesson not about pranks, but about being prepared for the consequences." Daisy laughed, shaking her head. "I'll remember that strategy if any of my students try something similar." They finished the work and stood back to admire their efforts. The schoolhouse looked welcoming and organized, ready for the start of term. "Thank you for your help," Daisy said sincerely. "It would have taken me twice as long on my own." Grant waved away her thanks. "Happy to help." He hesitated, then continued. "Actually, I had another reason for coming by today." Daisy looked at him curiously. "Oh." "There's a harvest dance next Saturday," Grant said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Sort of a tradition here in Galesburg before the fall work begins in earnest. I was wondering if you and Timothy might like to attend." "With me," he added, as if to clarify his meaning. Daisy felt a flutter of excitement at the invitation. "A dance," Grant nodded. "Nothing fancy. Just folks gathering at the town hall for music, dancing, and a potluck supper. But it's a good way to meet everyone, and I thought you might enjoy it." "I'd like that," Daisy said softly. We'd like that. Timothy will be thrilled. Grant's face relaxed into a smile. Good, that's good, he cleared his throat. I should let you get back to your preparations, unless there's anything else you need help with. Daisy shook her head. I think we're all set. She walked with him to the door. I'll see you tomorrow. Count on it, Grant replied. I thought I'd come by after school lets out, see how your first day went. As he stepped outside, he turned back briefly. You're going to be a wonderful teacher, Daisy, he said with quiet certainty. This town is lucky to have you. Before she could respond, he settled his hat on his head and strode away, leaving Daisy standing in the schoolhouse doorway with a warm glow in her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. The first day of school went better than Daisy had dared to hope. Her 22 students, ranging in age from 6 to 15, were indeed rowdy at times but generally respectful and eager to learn. By the end of the day, she'd established a rapport with most of them and had a clearer sense of their individual abilities and needs. When the final bell rang, the children gathered their belongings and filed out, calling goodbyes and, in the case of the younger ones, presenting her with wildflowers or small treasures they'd found on their way to school that morning. Daisy was erasing the blackboard when she heard the door open again. She turned to find Grant standing there, Timothy perched on his shoulders. "Mama," Timothy called excitedly. "Grant, let me help with the horses." Grant lifted the boy down, his eyes twinkling. "He's a natural with them," he told Daisy. "Got a way of talking to them that they seem to understand." "Is that so?" Daisy asked, smiling at her son's obvious delight. "And did you behave yourself for Mrs. Haverford this morning?" Timothy nodded enthusiastically. "She taught me to make biscuits and I helped her feed her chickens, and she told me stories about when she was a little girl." "Sounds like you had a full day," Daisy observed, gathering her teaching materials. "Are you ready to go home now?" Timothy looked up at Grant hopefully. "Can Grant come too?" Daisy hesitated, aware of how often Grant had been visiting. She didn't want to impose on his time, nor did she want to give the town cause for gossip, given that she was still technically in mourning. Grant seemed to sense her concern. "Actually, I should get back to the livery," he said, ruffling Timothy's hair. "Got a new horse coming in this evening that needs settling, but I'll see you both soon, all right?" Timothy looked disappointed but nodded. "Promise," Grant confirmed. "And I never break a promise, remember." As they walked home, Timothy skipping ahead as usual, Daisy found herself reflecting on how quickly Grant had become an important part of their lives. In the month since they'd arrived in Galesburg, he'd been their constant friend and supporter, asking nothing in return for his kindness. And if her feelings for him were developing into something more than friendship, well, that was a matter she'd need to consider carefully. The harvest dance arrived on a perfect autumn evening, the air crisp but not cold, the sky ablaze with stars. Daisy had spent more time than she cared to admit preparing for the event, finally settling on her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. Timothy was beside himself with excitement, dressed in his Sunday best, and chattering non-stop about the music and food that Grant had promised would be there. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at their door. When Daisy opened it, she found Grant standing there, looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a clean black suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. His usually unruly hair had been tamed, and he'd trimmed his beard neatly. For a moment they simply looked at each other, a new awareness hanging in the air between them. "You look beautiful, Daisy," Grant said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." Timothy broke the moment by rushing forward. "Grant, do you like my new shirt? Mama said I had to wear it because it's a special occasion. Grant crouched down to the boy's level, his face serious. It's a very fine shirt indeed, he agreed. Very appropriate for a gentleman attending a dance. Timothy beamed at the compliment. Are we going now? Will there be cake? Yes to both questions, Grant laughed, straightening. He offered his arm to Daisy. Shall we? The town hall was already filled with people when they arrived, the space transformed by lanterns and autumn decorations. A small band was playing in one corner, while tables laden with food lined another wall. Children ran about playing games and couples twirled on the makeshift dance floor. Mrs. Valois, Martha called, bustling over to greet them. We're so glad you could come. And Timothy, my goodness, don't you look handsome? Timothy ducked his head shyly at the compliment. Grant, you old fox, Martha continued, her eyes twinkling as she took in their arrival together. You didn't tell me you were escorting our new teacher to the dance. Grant shifted uncomfortably. Just being neighborly, Martha, he said, though the way his eyes lingered on Daisy suggested otherwise. Martha didn't appear convinced but let the matter drop. Well, there's plenty of food and the dancing's just getting started. Timothy, would you like to join the other children? I believe they're playing a game over by the apple barrel. Timothy looked to Daisy for permission, which she granted with a nod. As he ran off to join the other children, Martha leaned in conspiratorially. He's a credit to you, she told Daisy. Such a polite, well-mannered boy. Thank you, Daisy replied, warmed by the compliment. Martha excused herself to attend to other guests, leaving Daisy and Grant standing together somewhat awkwardly. Would you like something to eat? Grant asked. Mrs. Fitzgerald's fried chicken is legendary, and I can personally vouch for Mr. Peterson's apple cider. That sounds wonderful, Daisy agreed, allowing him to lead her to the food tables. As they filled their plates and found seats, Daisy marveled at how different this gathering was from the few social events she'd attended in Silver Creek. There, she'd always felt like an outsider, the other women closing ranks against the schoolteacher who'd married above her station, or so they believed. Here, people stopped by to chat, genuinely interested in how she was settling in and how the school term was progressing. After they'd eaten, Grant nodded toward the dance floor where couples were forming for a reel. Would you care to dance? He asked, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. Daisy hesitated. She hadn't danced since before Michael's death and wasn't sure if it was appropriate. Yet the thought of moving across the floor in Grant's arms was undeniably appealing. I'd like that, she decided. Though I may be a bit rusty, Grant smiled. That makes two of us. He led her onto the dance floor just as the music shifted to a waltz. His hand was warm at her waist, his other hand gentle as it clasped hers. For a moment, Daisy felt awkward, too aware of the eyes that might be watching them. But as they began to move, the music seemed to wrap around them, creating a private world where only they existed. You're a fine dancer, Mr. Quentin, Daisy observed, surprised by the ease with which he guided her through the steps. My mother insisted I learn, Grant replied, a smile playing at his lips. Said no son of hers was going to clump around a dance floor like a newborn colt. Daisy laughed, relaxing into the dance. She sounds like a formidable woman. She was, Grant agreed, his eyes softening with memory. Strong, opinionated, but kind. You remind me of her sometimes. Is that a compliment? Daisy asked, arching an eyebrow. Grant's smile deepened. The highest. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break to check on Timothy, who was happily engaged in a game of tag with several other children. Seeing that he was well occupied, they stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night air was refreshingly cool after the warmth of the crowded hall. Stars blazed overhead and the distant mountains were silhouettes against the midnight blue sky. It's beautiful here, Daisy said softly. I never saw stars like this in Silver Creek. Too much smoke from the mine. Grant nodded, his gaze on the heavens. One of the reasons I stayed, he admitted. The sky here makes a man feel small and significant all at the same time. They stood in companionable silence for a while, their shoulders nearly touching as they leaned against the railing of the town hall's small porch. Daisy, Grant said finally, turning to face her. I want to say something, and I hope you won't take it amiss. Daisy's heart quickened. What is it? Grant took a deep breath. I know you're still in mourning, and I respect that. I also know that your marriage wasn't what it should have been. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What I'm trying to say is that I care for you and Timothy. More than I expected to, more than might be proper, given the circumstances. Daisy felt a mixture of elation and uncertainty at his confession. Grant, you don't need to say anything, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I'm content to be your friend for as long as you need, and if that's all we ever are, I'll count myself fortunate. Daisy was moved by his honesty and his willingness to respect her circumstances. Thank you for understanding, she said softly. I care for you too, Grant, very much, but I need time. Grant nodded, his expression one of quiet acceptance. Time you shall have, he promised, as much as you need. The moment was broken by Timothy bursting through the door, his face flushed with excitement. Mama, Grant, they're going to have cake now, and Mr. Peterson says there's going to be a fiddle contest, Grant laughed, reaching down to swing the boy onto his shoulders. Well, we can't miss that, can we? Your mama and I were just getting some fresh air. As they returned to the festivities, Daisy felt a newfound lightness in her heart. Grant's confession had confirmed what she'd suspected, but had been afraid to acknowledge that their growing friendship held the potential for something deeper, something lasting. And while she wasn't ready to explore that potential just yet, the knowledge that it existed, that it waited patiently for her to be ready, filled her with a quiet joy. Autumn deepened into winter, the mountains surrounding Galesburg disappearing beneath a blanket of snow. The school term continued successfully, with Daisy's students making steady progress under her guidance. Timothy thrived in their new home, making friends with neighborhood children and becoming a favorite of many of the townspeople, who delighted in his curious nature and ready smile. Grant remained a constant in their lives, though he was careful not to overstep the boundaries Daisy had gently established after the harvest dance. He visited regularly but not daily, always finding small ways to help without making Daisy feel dependent. He continued to teach Timothy about horses and often brought small gifts, a jar of preserves, a book he thought Daisy might enjoy, a wooden toy he'd carved himself for Timothy. As Christmas approached, the town began preparations for its annual holiday celebrations. The school was to host a pageant, with Daisy's students performing a nativity play and reciting poetry they'd memorized for the occasion. 2 weeks before the event, Daisy was working late at the schoolhouse, preparing costumes for the pageant, when Grant arrived with Timothy in tow. Mrs. Haverford had to attend to her sister, who's taken ill, he explained as Timothy ran to show his mother the small wooden horse Grant had helped him carve. I offered to bring him here. That was kind of you, Daisy said, setting aside her sewing. I'm afraid I've lost track of time. These costumes are proving more challenging than I anticipated. Grant surveyed the piles of fabric and half-finished shepherd's robes with amusement. Need an extra pair of hands. I'm no seamstress, but I can manage basic stitching. Learned in the army. Daisy gratefully accepted his offer, and they worked together for the next hour, talking easily about the upcoming pageant and the town's Christmas traditions. Timothy, content with his new toy, played quietly nearby. As they worked, Daisy found herself watching Grant's hands strong and capable, yet gentle as they carefully stitched the hem of a robe. So different from Michael's hands, which had grown rough with drink and anger in the later years of their marriage. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Grant asked, catching her gaze. Daisy smiled, a little embarrassed to have been caught staring. "I was just thinking how different you are from Michael," she admitted. Grant's expression turned serious. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," Daisy assured him. "Very good." They fell silent again, but the air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Daisy had been thinking a great deal about Grant over the past months, about the connection that had formed between them almost from the moment they'd met. About the way Timothy had blossomed under his attention and about her own growing feelings for him. "Grant," she said suddenly, setting down her sewing, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Grant looked up, his expression curious. "I'm listening." Before Daisy could continue, Timothy appeared at her elbow. "Mama, I'm hungry," he announced. "Can we go home now?" The moment broken. Daisy nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. We're finished for today anyway." She began gathering the costumes, avoiding Grant's eyes. "Thank you for your help, Grant." "Anytime," he replied, his tone suggesting he understood that whatever she'd been about to say would have to wait for another day. That other day came unexpectedly the following week. A fierce blizzard had swept through the region, forcing Daisy to dismiss school early as the snow piled up. She and Timothy had hurried home, only to find that their wood supply was dangerously low, an oversight on Daisy's part, who was still adjusting to the harsh Montana winters. As she considered her options, venture out into the storm to try to purchase more wood, or conserve what they had and hope it lasted until the blizzard passed, a knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, she found Grant standing there, his shoulders covered in snow, his arms laden with firewood. "Thought you might be running low," he explained, stamping the snow from his boots before entering. "The storm came on faster than anyone expected." "How did you know?" Daisy asked, taking some of the wood from him and leading the way to the wood box beside the stove. Grant shrugged as he deposited his load. "Just a hunch, and I was worried about you both." Timothy, who had been playing with his wooden figures by the stove, jumped up at the sight of Grant. "Did you bring sugar?" he asked, referring to Grant's mare. "Not today, buddy," Grant replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Even Sugar doesn't like being out in weather like this." After they'd stacked the wood, Grant turned to leave, but Daisy stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You can't go back out in that storm," she said firmly. "It's getting worse by the minute." Grant hesitated, clearly torn between concern for propriety and practical considerations. "I don't want to impose," he began. "You're not imposing," Daisy insisted. "I'm inviting you to stay until the storm passes." "I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you on your way back to the livery." Grant finally nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and something else Daisy couldn't quite identify. "All right," he agreed, "until the storm passes." The blizzard, as it turned out, continued well into the night and through the following morning. Grant slept on the floor near the stove. Despite Daisy's offer of her bed, she would have taken the rocking chair, she assured him. The enforced proximity created a strange intimacy, a glimpse of what life might be like if they were truly a family. They played games with Timothy, shared meals prepared from Daisy's limited pantry supplies, and talked for hours after the boy had gone to sleep, their voices low in the lamp-lit room. It was during one of these late-night conversations that Daisy finally found the courage to say what she'd been thinking for weeks. "Grant," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What you said at the harvest dance, about caring for Timothy and me." Grant's expression grew wary. "I meant it," he said quietly. "Every word." Daisy took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about it, about us. And I've realized that I don't need more time. I know what I feel." Grant went very still, his eyes never leaving her face. "And what do you feel, Daisy?" "I feel." She hesitated, then continued with newfound resolve. "I feel that life is too short and too precious to deny what's in my heart. And what's in my heart is you, Grant Quentin." A slow smile spread across Grant's face, transforming it with joy. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want to rush you, or for you to feel obligated in any way." Daisy shook her head. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said simply. "You've shown me what it means to be truly cared for, to be respected and valued. You've been a friend when I needed one most, and you've been a father figure to Timothy when he desperately needed that too." Grant rose from his chair and crossed to kneel beside her rocker. "Daisy Valois," he said, taking her hands in his. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing in the rain, protecting your son with nothing but your own body and determination. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me, if you'll let me." Daisy felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "I would like that very much," she whispered, slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw. Grant leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and filled with promise. When they broke apart, Daisy felt as though something long broken within her had finally begun to heal. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Grant smiled, his thumbs gently caressing the backs of her hands. "Now, I think we take things one day at a time," he said. "There's no rush, Daisy. We have all the time in the world." The blizzard eventually subsided, but the change it had brought to Daisy and Grant's relationship remained. Over the coming weeks, they navigated the transition from friendship to courtship with care, mindful of the town's potential for gossip and of Timothy's adjustment to the new dynamic. To Daisy's relief, Timothy was delighted by the development. He'd already formed a strong attachment to Grant, and seemed to instinctively understand that Grant's increased presence in their lives was a positive change. Christmas came and went, with Grant joining them for the holiday meal and presenting Timothy with a hand-crafted wooden rocking horse that reduced the boy to speechless joy. His gift to Daisy was more modest, but equally thoughtful, a small silver locket containing a tiny sketch of Timothy that he'd commissioned from a traveling artist. Winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Daisy's school term was drawing to a close, with plans already forming for the following year. She and Grant had settled into a comfortable routine, with him joining them for supper several times a week and accompanying them to church on Sundays. As the anniversary of their arrival in Galesburg approached, Grant suggested a picnic to celebrate the occasion. "The wildflowers are blooming up on Hopkins Ridge," he told Daisy as they walked home from church one Sunday, Timothy running ahead to chase a butterfly. "I thought we might ride up there, the three of us." Daisy smiled at the suggestion. "That sounds lovely," she agreed. Timothy would enjoy the adventure. The following Saturday dawned clear and warm, perfect for their outing. Grant arrived early with 3 horses, his own chestnut stallion, his gentle mare Sugar for Daisy, and a small pony he'd borrowed for Timothy, who was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of having his very own mount for the day. After ensuring that Timothy was securely in the saddle and understood the basics of guiding his pony, they set out, following a trail that wound out of town and up into the surrounding hills. Hopkins Ridge, when they reached it, proved to be a meadow carpeted with wildflowers in every imaginable color. A small stream meandered along one edge, and the view of the valley below was breathtaking. "It's beautiful," Daisy exclaimed as Grant helped her dismount. How did you find this place?" "Stumbled across it my first summer here," Grant replied, lifting Timothy down from his pony. "I've always thought it was special." They spread a blanket beneath the shade of a lone pine tree and unpacked the picnic basket that Daisy had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a jug of lemonade. Timothy ate quickly, then asked permission to explore the meadow, solemnly promising not to go out of sight. As they watched him wander among the wildflowers, occasionally stooping to examine a particularly interesting bloom or insect, Grant reached for Daisy's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Daisy turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Of course I am," she replied. "Happier than I ever expected to be again." Grant nodded, his expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the future, about what I want, what I hope for." Daisy felt her heart quicken. "And what do you hope for, Grant?" His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with an emotion so deep it took her breath away. "I hope for a life with you and Timothy," he said simply. "A family, our family." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I know it's only been a few months," he continued, tipping the contents of the pouch into his palm to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "And if you think it's too soon, I understand. But I love you, Daisy Valois, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Tears blurred Daisy's vision as Grant slipped from the blanket to kneel before her. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," Daisy whispered, then repeated more loudly, "Yes, Grant Quentin, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss filled with promise and love, and the future they would build together. A shout from Timothy broke them apart. The boy was racing toward them, his hands cupped carefully around something. "Mama, Grant, look what I found," he called, skidding to a halt beside the blanket. He opened his hands to reveal a tiny frog, its emerald skin glistening in the sunlight. Grant laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "A fine specimen," he declared, examining the creature. "Reminds me of the one that got me in trouble in school." Timothy's eyes widened. "You brought a frog to school." As Grant launched into the story, embellished now for Timothy's benefit, Daisy watched them together, the man she loved, and the son who was her whole world, already forming the bonds that would make them truly father and son. She felt a sense of rightness, of completion, as if the long journey that had begun in that rain-soaked night had always been leading here, to this sun-drenched meadow and the family they were becoming. They were married in the small church in Galesburg 2 months later, on a perfect June day. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the women bringing dishes for the wedding feast, the men setting up tables and benches in the town square. Timothy, dressed in a new suit that matched Grant's, stood proudly at their side throughout the ceremony, his small face solemn with the importance of the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, he was the first to cheer, his joy infectious as the congregation joined in. The reception lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than could possibly be consumed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square, Grant found Daisy sitting alone for a moment, watching Timothy play with the other children. "Mrs. Quentin," he said, offering his hand. "May I have this dance?" Daisy smiled up at him, love filling her heart to bursting. "You may indeed, Mr. Quentin." As they moved together across the improvised dance floor, Daisy thought back to that rainy night when a stranger on horseback had offered shelter to a desperate woman and her child. How could she have known then that in helping them, Grant was offering not just temporary refuge but a lifetime of love? "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, noticing her distant expression. "I'm thinking about the night we met," Daisy replied. "About how different everything might have been if you hadn't come along when you did." Grant's arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I did," he said softly, "that I found you waiting in the rain." Daisy laid her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "You told me that night that I'd never wait alone again," she reminded him. "Do you remember?" "I remember," Grant confirmed, "and I meant it." "I know you did," Daisy said. "And you've kept that promise every day since." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Daisy and Grant continued to dance, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, never alone again. 5 years later, Daisy stood on the porch of their home, watching as Grant taught their daughter, Rose, to ride her first pony. Timothy, now 9, was demonstrating proper form, sitting tall in his saddle with the confidence of a boy who had spent countless hours on horseback under his stepfather's tutelage. Their lives had settled into a rhythm that brought Daisy joy each day. She continued to teach at the schoolhouse, though she'd taken a brief hiatus after Rose's birth 2 years earlier. Grant's livery business had expanded, and he now bred and trained horses that were sought after throughout the territory. Timothy had thrived under Grant's guidance, growing into a thoughtful, capable boy who shared his stepfather's affinity for horses and his mother's love of books. He called Grant Pa now, a transition that had occurred naturally over time, and the bond between them was as strong as any biological connection could have been. Rose, with her father's blue-green eyes and her mother's dark curls, was a spirited child who had wrapped the entire family around her tiny fingers from the moment of her birth. Grant, in particular, was putty in her hands, unable to deny her anything when she turned those eyes on him. As Daisy watched, Rose let out a peal of laughter as Grant led her pony in a circle, her little hands clutching the saddle horn with determination. Timothy rode alongside, offering encouragement and occasional instructions that mimicked Grant's teaching style so perfectly that Daisy couldn't help but smile. This was her family, not the one she had imagined as a young bride setting out for the West, but infinitely more precious for having been found through hardship and unexpected kindness. The sound of hoofbeats announced a visitor, and Daisy turned to see Martha approaching on her ancient mare. In her role as head of the town council, Martha still made it her business to know everything happening in Galesburg, though she tempered her curiosity with genuine affection for its inhabitants. "Afternoon, Daisy," Martha called as she dismounted with surprising agility for a woman of her years. "I was passing by and thought I'd stop to invite you all to the harvest dance next month, though I expect Grant already knows about it, being on the planning committee." "He mentioned it," Daisy confirmed, gesturing for Martha to join her on the porch. "Rose is very excited about her first proper dance, though I've told her she'll need to leave before the late hours." Martha settled into one of the rocking chairs, accepting the glass of lemonade Daisy offered. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years since you arrived," she observed. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if you'd continued on to Idaho that day?" Daisy smiled, her eyes finding Grant, who had noticed their visitor and was now leading both children and their mounts toward the house. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I look at my family, at the life we've built here, and I can only be grateful for the rain that delayed us, and for the kindness of a stranger who refused to let a woman and child wait alone in a storm." Martha nodded, her expression knowing. "Providence works in mysterious ways," she said. "Though in this case, I'd say it was pretty clear in its intentions." As Grant reached the porch, lifting Rose into his arms while Timothy led the ponies to the small corral beside the house, Daisy felt the familiar warmth of gratitude and love that had become the foundation of her life. "Hello, Martha," Grant greeted their visitor, setting Rose down to run to her mother. "What brings you our way?" "Just delivering invitations to the harvest dance," Martha replied, accepting a sticky kiss on the cheek from Rose. "And admiring your fine family." Grant's eyes met Daisy's over their daughter's head, a world of shared history and love in his gaze. "Yes," he agreed simply. "They are pretty fine, aren't they?" Later that evening, after the children were asleep, and the house had settled into the peaceful quiet of night, Daisy and Grant sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Montana sky. "Happy?" Grant asked, his arm around her shoulders, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had from the first time he'd held her. "Completely," Daisy replied, leaning into his warmth. "You?" Grant's answer was to draw her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Beyond words," he said softly. "Every day with you is a gift, Daisy, one I never take for granted." As they sat in comfortable silence, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a rain-soaked night of desperation to this peaceful evening filled with contentment. Life had not always been easy in the years since their marriage. There had been hardships and challenges, as there were in any life. But they had faced them together, their love strengthening with each obstacle overcome. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Daisy asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "About waiting in the rain," Grant nodded, his cheek resting against her hair. "I said you'd never wait alone again," he recalled. "Not while I was around, and I haven't," Daisy said simply. "Not once in all these years." Grant turned to face her, his expression visible in the silver moonlight that bathed the porch. "And you never will," he promised, the words both an echo of that long-ago vow and a renewal of it. "For as long as I live, Daisy Quentin, you'll never have to face a storm alone." As their lips met in a kiss that held all the tenderness of their years together and all the promise of the years to come, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginning, led exactly where they were meant, to shelter, to family, and to a love that would weather any storm.